Hello, folks. We're getting people loaded into the room from the waiting room because this, as opposed to a webinar, is going to be a meeting today. So it's a little bit different for us, but we're glad that you're here. I see my friend Rita is here. And Pamela is here. Susan Levine is here. Steve Cochran, Patty, Laura, Jane, good to see you all. Oh, nice. We've got such a good turnout. Sandy, Darlene, Priscilla, Gail, Brenda. Oh my goodness. Adele. This is awesome. Well, I'm so glad that you guys are here to join us today as we are getting ready to go on our webinar adventure or our book club adventure around the book Night Magic. And I hope some of you also have your copy with you if you need to reference it. And I want to thank Kirsten Thompson for all of her work that she did to put the book club together and provide the questions and keep the chat going as we started. So we've been reading since June. We read June, July, and a little bit of August. So it was perfect summer read for us. And so I want to welcome you all today. Thank you for being here, but mostly I want to welcome our author, Leigh Ann Henion. She is joining us from North Carolina today, and she's here, but I'm also going to show you her pretty picture and read the book jacket for you. She is a New York Times best-selling author of Phenomenal, A Hesitant's Adventure Search for Wonder in the Natural World. Her writing has also appeared in Washington Post, Smithsonian, Backpacker, and a bunch of other publications. She's a former Alicia Patterson Fellow, and her work has been supported by the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation. She lives in Boone, North Carolina, and she is joining us today, and we're just so thrilled. And I hope a lot of you enjoyed the book, and I know I did. And I also became kind of a pest to the people around me when I would say, did you know, and I hope you did this too, did you know that moths do this, or did you know that the fireflies do that? So folks, I became a real factoid generator for my friends. So Leigh Ann, welcome. We are so glad that you're here.
Much for having me, and thanks to everybody for reading the book. That's actually what it was like when I was writing the book. I mean, I was like, I can't wait for everybody to read this. I've got to like text a friend, did you know this? Like, I can't wait to share. Yeah, so it's a lot of fun.
Super. All right, so we're going to jump into our questions, and folks in the audience, if you'll go ahead and put your questions in the Q&A box or in the chat box, whichever one you want. Or also, Becky, they can unmute and share as well if they want to ask a question. So it's interactive. It's a lot more relaxed than our usual meetings. So please go ahead and join in. So I'm going to go to the first question. And the question is about your inspiration. What was your inspiration? Was there a particular moment or an event that kind of sparked that desire to write the book?
Yes. So the first chapter about fireflies, so that actually was a magazine. It started as a magazine piece that I wrote for the Washington Post magazine. And so I wrote a piece about synchronous fireflies for the Washington Post. And the experience that I had was very inspiring. But also when the original article ran, I started having a lot of readers reached out to me, and they said, oh, love this article. And it inspired me to turn off my porch lights more often. And that just blew my mind. I had written this story, and somebody in Kansas has been inspired to change their immediate environment with a direct action because of this story. So that was amazing to me. And, I initially started learning about light pollution through that experience and how it affects the life cycles of fireflies. And as we come to find out, pretty much every life form on Earth. And so I thought, well, I've learned so much from fireflies. What could I learn from salamanders and owls and glowworms and all of these other creatures that depend on darkness like we do? But so really, I credit the fireflies. Fireflies completely inspired the larger journey that I took in the book, and that initial magazine piece, and really readers' response kind of helped me find my way.
Yeah, yeah. And to know that your writing can impact people's lives and the environment and the creatures around, I'm sure that was a real powerful moment for you. And, you really seized the opportunity. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredibly hard to change a habit or inspire someone to take an action. So mind was blown. So hopefully the book kind of, builds on that in a positive way.
Does, but that's not what you set out to do, to change people's minds and their hearts. And, and I think it comes off with just let me educate you, let me share my enthusiasm, my passion with you. And then they respond in that way.
And I really I feel like one of the other takeaways was I'm pretty sure that people didn't reach out to me because I had told them all of the negative things that light pollution does. I'm pretty sure that they reached out just because they got excited to discover what was around their own yard, and so that's like my great quest, it's really just to inspire people to discover. And I think that there's a really powerful motivator in that notion. So I attempted not to focus on what light pollution takes away, but rather on what darkness offers, because I just think we don't have a lot of dark positive storytelling in our culture. And I really think that's something that we could start to value more if we want to start paying attention to darkness as something of value.
Right, right. And I feel like, the way you wrote it, you would, go on this grand adventure and then have all the facts and the science behind it. And then you would go home with your son and to the driveway or to the neighbors and, share that message that way and really showed people how to teach someone, to expose them, to share that passion with a friend or a family member. And I feel like you were modeling the behavior that we do want to see around this. So that was a really neat way you did.
Yeah. And a little bit of an accident. I mean, obviously that, but over and over again, it's like I go seeking to find something only to discover it's actually been with me the whole time. I mean, on some level that just kept happening in ways that I didn't really completely expect. But I mean, that became the book, I mean, that really is like an enduring lesson from it, We're surrounded by wonder all the time. Yeah.
Right, right. Awesome. Okay, so we're gonna, unless someone wants to, uh-oh, hope nobody saw that, but you probably did. So was there a person or a teacher or something, or who or what first introduced you to the wonders of nature, and how did that lead you to become a nature writer?
Well, I would say my I went to summer camp as a kid, and I think that played a huge role in developing that interest. But I also think my mom was incredibly powerful influence in that regard. She, just really my parents let me collect rocks and just keep them in strange places. I would go out and look for mushrooms and collect them all just so I could see them. I mean, they were just really encouraging of my nature centric habits as a kid. And my mom was a teacher, and she used to just make me these little blank books. She would just, like out of she had like, contact paper or something. She would make these little blank books for me to fill. So I just had, kind of this magical situation where I have all these, my funny collections and time to wander around in the woods and these little books to fill with stories and pictures. But it took me a long time it sounds like I've been doing this for my whole life, and I have. But of course, adult life, it takes a while to figure out how to make that a profession.
Right.
But I did, yeah.
How could you not be a writer if your mom gave you little books to fill?
I know. So I credit her completely. Yeah.
Fantastic, fantastic. I love that. And I think parents and friends and teachers can do so much to open a child's eyes or a person's eyes to a different way of thinking and to kind of believe in themselves and to nurture that. Um,
Yeah. And to
y-
create space for it. So that was really wonderful.
yeah, yeah, for sure. All right, we're gonna jump on to the next question. Oh, and I want everyone to be thinking about this too, because I want to hear from them. What stands out to you as the most magical creature in night magic and why?
Yeah. I mean, so it's a hard one. It's a hard question. I think that if I was really forced to choose and to talk about it, it would really be not only I don't know, the most magical creature, they're all magical, but in terms of kind of the most surprising to me, kind of like that kind of shocked me into awe a little bit, would have to be the story of glowworms. So for years, I wanted to visit New Zealand to see their famous glowworms. There are caves of glowworms. You can go in forests, just glowworms all over the place. Blue neon glowworms I've known about for so long, but it wasn't until I started writing the book and I went looking for fireflies that I realized that Southern Appalachia, my very home region, is one of the only other places on Earth that has neon blue glowing glowworms. And so for me, this reality, like because you've read the books, it's not really a spoiler alert, but not only did I find them in a neighboring county in great concentrations, I ended up finding them in my own neighborhood, on a road that I've driven by, for decades, with never knowing they were there. And so, most magical creature, I mean, to me, that's kind of like the most magical story because it really is that kind of like night is this parallel universe and they've been there the whole time. I just hadn't been looking for them and allowing darkness to come so that I could see them. And so to me, that's a really magical experience and kind of a reveal.
Yeah, for sure. Kirsten, what did you think was the most magical for you?
Definitely the fireflies. After reading the book, I now want to go to the Great Smoky Mountains and see the synchronous fireflies. I put it on my bucket list.
They're so wonderful. And also don't discount the blue ghosts. I love the blue ghost fireflies so much. And they're often with the glowworms. So they're both neon blue and the blue ghost fireflies, they're like little fairies. They just stay continually lit. It's wild. Yeah.
Yeah, for me, I think it was the blue ghost. I've never seen it, but I feel like that's maybe people understood that to be a fairy, maybe this kind of, the interpretation of that. And that's something I've never seen. I had never even heard of it before I read the book. So that was just, fantastic. So folks out there, if you want to pop in the chat box or put unmute your mic to say which one you thought was the most magical. I'm gonna call on you.
Too hard to pick.
Becky, can they? They can. Okay. All right, don't be too shy. This is why they serve wine at book club. So Parmi said glowworms. Yeah, it's pretty fantastic. And I thought the Foxfire was really interesting as well. And I learned so much from that. I just thought that was awesome. And now I can't wait to go try and look for mushrooms out there that are glowing or mycelium that are glowing. And we have a lot of the shoestring or the armillaria mushroom around here. I was like, well, next time I see those, they're gonna get infected.
I agree. Foxfire is incredibly magical. Yeah.
And Gail says the fireflies. And Laura says the bats.
Oh, I love that because, as I talk about in the book, I feel like bats just don't get the positive press, So I'm glad that bats were on the list of most magical.
Yeah, maybe we'll talk about them a little bit more as we go on. So Steve said he saw the fireflies at Gettysburg National Cemetery and they were surreal. That must have been amazing.
Yeah,
And
I also love, they used to think so pinpoint specific and rare, but I really have come to believe, I mean, there are pockets of a lot of these species all over the place. And people just don't know, because we're not in the dark, seeking it out.
right. And Rita says fireflies and glowworms. Yeah, and for me in North Central Florida, where I go see the fireflies is up in High Springs near the Santa Fe River, and it's brief. I mean, it's basically April is when it's going to be peaking, and that's when it's going to be awesome. And then after that, it's just a few individuals that you see a little bit. So you also have to have your timing right like that.
Yeah, fireflies are fantastic. And I think for a lot of people, there's a nostalgia attached from childhood. You remember this as a really impactful nature experience. And so, yeah, to have it, see it as an adult kind of brings that back.
And Sandy says, I teach a lesson on bioluminescence with 4-H youth, so I love any creature that glows. It
Me
is,
too.
it's really great. It's really great.
Yeah.
So, all right, everybody. Good job. We're gonna move on to our next. Uh-oh. Come on, Wendy. Stop driving. So she's trying, everybody. So how might gardeners support wildlife and plants that that need the darkness for their life?
Well, I think, for me in this process, just to start thinking about artificial light as a factor that affects plants. So many friends of mine, because I have really, in addition to I mean, I've talked about it, the whole process while I was working on it. So many of them are like, man, I spend so much time thinking about shade and like sunlight, and they'd never even thought about artificial light and how leaving lights that might be shining on their garden, how that could be affecting their plants or disrupting pollinators that would be coming if it was dark. So I think just paying attention to the use of artificial light is just a great way to start. And in the book, I've tried to also take this from a place of enjoying the darkness and like enjoying the garden after dusk or at dusk, and all of these things that take place there, that often go unobserved. So I think that when you start getting excited about observing a hawk moth, that's kind of a great that's great motivation to turn the lights off. So I think that paying attention to lights, limiting artificial light when possible, planting things that can be enjoyed in the dark, particularly, like flowers with bright blooms, night blooming flowers that can be enjoyed at night by humans, and also those that would attract moths. So not just, gardening for butterflies. A lot of people think about gardening for butterflies, but to think about garden in terms of moths and night blooming flowers, and thinking about what kind of plants attract specific moths. I mean, that's just really exciting to me. It's kind of like writing a little script for a magical scene. So thinking about it in those terms, I think is kind of fun and also helpful for pollinators and plants in general.
Yeah, I might say too to leave your cavity, leave your snag trees up for our bats or any cavity dwellers or any insects that may need to be in the bark to be there. So
Oh yes.
um,
And
so
let some areas go wild around, like let things grow up and let the dry grass stay. Don't try to clean fallen leaves. Those are incredibly important for fireflies and things like that, definitely.
yeah, those fallen leaves and we don't have to rake every single leaf off and put it by the curb. Leaving that more natural is going to encourage those insects to be there. And another thing a lot of Floridians know about is not pruning the brown off of the sable palms, because a lot of times bats will go up and nest
Oh.
nest
Hmm.
fallen or the laying down branches of the sable palms. So that's a good one too. I also thinking reducing pesticides,
Yeah,
this,
definitely. That's a huge one. I mean, one of the largest threats to fireflies and a lot of other creatures like that is pesticides. So paying close attention to pesticide use is huge.
yeah. And Stephen said he started following Dark Sky International after reading the book, and that they
Oh, good.
informative Instagram account. So that's awesome, Steve. And Susan, who is kind of like our little fire starter, not little, she is the fire starter for book club. She's always like, what's our next book? What's our next book? But Susan said the hardest thing is to actually achieve darkness because there's so much light. Yeah, it's true.
Yes, it is true, and it's so hard. And the book, I really hope that the book can help with it. I tell this story. I have a neighbor who, she found out I was writing the book, and she's like, I'm so glad you're writing this, because she has a neighbor, down the road, and she's like, the light, he put up this new light and it's shining right into my living room. And so a lot of times when you start talking about trying to find darkness and issues with light pollution, people say, oh, my neighbor. And so I just started thinking, okay, I want to write a book that Kristen can just slip into her neighbor's mailbox to share in a kind of more of like an invitation rather than a, a scolding. But I told that story at a book event, and somebody at the end, they came up with like a stack of books, and they're like, okay, make this one out to me. And they're like, in this one, could you just write, to Dawn, turn out your lights? And they're like, that's going in his mailbox. And I was like, they didn't sign it, but I did. So hopefully Dawn was receptive receptive to that. But I do think that it's exciting to me to think about, there's that metaphor where it's like, one candle lights the next. But in this case, it really is, you go dark and you kind of inspire the next person to go dark. And it really is, darkness is something that we can reclaim together.
It's a conversation to have. We have a street light that's, well, probably 4 people are impacted by the street light, and it went out, and we all decided that we weren't calling the city to get it replaced. And so,
Neighborhood dark party.
dark corner, and we're not saying anything about it. They'll never know. They're not coming back out at night unless someone calls and says, we need that light on. So
I love that you have that relationship with your neighbors. You have a little coalition.
Yeah, we just
dark sky neighbors. Yeah.
Oh man, we just came up with some really good ideas. Okay, great. So the next one is, I have to close the chat. Okay, Wendy, you can do it. Yeah, so this is Kirsten wrote this question because she really is truly so fascinated about, talk a little bit more about your experience seeing the synchronous fireflies, and how did this experience shape your writing?
Yeah, so I mean, I was really shocked by the synchronous fireflies. For one thing about that experience, at which I hopefully comes through in the book, it's like the fireflies were magnificent, but also that was the experience that really introduced me to the concept of darkness as something that is also spectacular. It was such a restorative experience to walk around in the dark, to do that, something that I realized I'd never really done before. And also this concept that darkness could reveal things, because so often when we talk about being in the dark, or we're talking about shrouding something rather than revealing something. And so here was a situation where the darkness is the only reason that I was allowed this magnificent experience of seeing the synchronous fireflies. So it was revealing this to me in a positive way. So that was really powerful, just kind of in that dark positive idea. And then also I was shocked by the synchronous fireflies because I really thought that they were just going to be like lights on, lights off, lights on, lights off. But that's not what they do. It's, you have this little twinkling, and then all of a sudden it's that whoosh, and then it's like whoosh in the other direction. It's like watching this like living version of the northern lights, along the forest floor. And it's really it's an incredibly moving experience. And just the fireflies in general just help me start to think about light and dark. Light not necessarily positive, dark not necessarily negative, but just how that the light and the dark, that blinking, how that really is just important for life on earth. And it was just, I don't know, it was fantastic, and really helped me the fireflies helped me appreciate the dark, and that's like their greatest gift to me.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
A whole new world, literally.
Yes.
But I'm curious about this part and the kind of the logistics. So you
Hmm.
apply for apply for a lottery ticket, or you apply for admission, or somehow there's a limited number of people that go, you get admitted, you come what time do you get there? How many people are with you, and are you guided, and then do they shush you out?
Yes. So there's a lottery system. So years ago, they instituted the lottery system because it's tens of thousands of people apply to the lottery. So when you get there, so you get the tickets, you get and there are people that have applied for 8 years, and finally get the lottery. I mean, it's just everybody kind of an annual event. They apply for it. Once you do get in, um, you drive in, there's a little trail, you show up before it's dark, and you're kind of guided onto this little trail. And yeah, there are people to keep you in a specific area so that you don't have people wandering off into the understory trampoline. So it's really keeping you on that trail. And then as it gets dark, there's that kind of anticipation, and then it starts happening. And another part of the synchronous firefly event that's really pretty powerful is to be in a crowd of people in the dark. I mean, you're with and there are hundreds of people just lining the trail where you're allowed to walk, and hundreds of strangers, in the dark, and you're kind of just like jostling around, like, oh, excuse me, you're bumping into people, and nobody has lights. And that was just such an interesting experience. And I've always loved, people gather to watch a sunset. It's some famous places, and so it's like you're gathering to kind of watch the darkness and then watch these insects light up. And it's just, there's a really nice communal aspect to that shared sense of wonder, like watching the sunset, like watching these fireflies rise. And so it's really lovely in a lot of different ways.
That sense of community, the wonder,
Yeah.
the anticipation of it all, I'm sure is,
Yeah.
let's see, someone's in the chat. I wonder if anyone else is gone. Lori says a great dark skies area where we saw a lot of owls and bats is the area around Smoke Hole Caverns near Seneca Rocks, West Virginia. Well, that sounds great.
Yeah, West Virginia is actually they have great dark skies in West Virginia, so that's a wonderful place to experience natural darkness.
And Sandy said that your book has inspired her to develop lessons for kids to embrace darkness instead of fearing it.
I love that so much. Yes. Thank you for doing that work.
Oh, it's really great. Well, this is so good. Okay, so now this is for you all in the audience. Is there anything you wish to see or experience after reading Night Magic? Okay, someone has already jumped in. Lightning. So Darlene says they're the favorite of the book or lightning bugs and owls. Yes. But is there anything that you want to see now? I want to see Foxfire because I've had no clue.
Yeah.
I knew that we had like you, Leigh Ann, we had the whole series of books on the farm I grew up on. And I just thought it was a catchy name. I didn't know it was actually something. So that was.
It's mind blowing. Then you learn and you're like, what? Yeah. Yeah. And I will tell you, once you see Foxfire, you might just want to see more of it because it's so diverse and interesting. It's just beautiful.
I see. And Lori says Foxfire and Glowworm she wants to see. Day Goldsmith said, every chapter has been a new add to my bucket list. Definitely the glowworm caves in New Zealand and Foxfire. Yes.
I would still go to New Zealand to see the glow. Even though I have them here, I would still love to do that as well. Yeah.
Thank you, Day. That's great. Patty said glowworms. Oh, let's see. I can just see whole tours like coming around these things. Susan said, as hard as I tried to get into a dark night space, I could not. Going forward, experiencing dark night space is still a goal. Yeah,
Yes.
it is so difficult. And I grew up outside of Miami in the farmland way out there. And we had,
Mhm.
now there just really isn't darkness. When I go back to the farm, it doesn't exist. We can look to the west and see the Everglades, the darkness over on that side, but
Mhm.
it's so bright.
It's yeah, and I really again, I started working on the book, and I thought that where I live is pretty dark, but then as I've gone to darker places, just kind of realizing how much darkness has been lost around me. It happens, without really you noticing. Over time, there are actually maps I've seen where I can see the light pollution encroaching on my actual neighborhood, which was really startling to see that. But it is getting, harder and harder to find those dark spaces. So I think that's a fantastic, goal to just try to, seek out those darker spots, and also to just try to find the darkest places that we can close by, because even sometimes without complete darkness, there's still some fantastic things
Oh,
to witness.
definitely, definitely. There's still a lot of fun to be had there. Rita said she enjoyed the chapter, as I've spent 25 to 30 years visiting the area around Grandfather Mountain, Spruce Pine, and CeeLo, etc. So
Oh, good.
that's
Silo's just such a magical place all its own. Yeah.
never heard of it before. And I had a friend who taught at Penland, and so I texted her. I was like, "Hey,
Like
like, of course I have. How come you haven't heard of it?" So that was kind of
Silo's amazing. Yeah, it really is a special little place.
definitely. And Darlene said that she said Foxfire would be a real experience for sure. Oh, good job, you guys. Thank you. And this was something that was really thought-provoking, I think probably for everyone, is how is our artificial light affecting plants?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm pretty sure it's in the book where I write about, how light pollution is affecting bud burst and leaf fall of trees, which is something that I had never, I just never really thought about. So that's in the book. But I mean, since publishing the book, even, because I read about all this all the time. But for example, there was a study that came out actually after the book came out very recently, where they're actually learning, light pollution can cause that can cause leaves to become tougher. And so
Mm.
they're actually finding that plants that are in extremely artificially lit places, when the leaves become tougher, it's actually becoming more difficult for caterpillars to eat those leaves. So we're still learning so much about how artificial light affects plants. And really, I think it's just to even consider that light pollution is affecting plants is a pretty huge epiphany. Because it's just not something that is talked about or thought about a whole lot. And the research, is really pretty much in its infancy when you really think about it. But so there are all of these different ways. There are grasslands. They found that, in grasslands, it can change dominant species, because species that do better and with that artificial light, and ones that don't. So it really just affects in so many different ways.
For me, the one that really stuck with me was, affecting trees, drought tolerance. Because if it is continuing to photosynthesize later into the day, or never
Right.
actually breaks that photosynthesis, that it's continuing to pull up water, and it's becoming more, it's getting drought stressed perhaps because of that. And that's because that's one of the things I teach a lot about is water
Yeah.
conservation and drought stress.
So
And
yeah,
and then
not able.
is this also changing, that we're experiencing the effects of climate change? Like, we can no longer really grow dogwoods in north central Florida. And I'm wondering,
Mm.
is the lighting impacting that as well? I didn't mean to interrupt you, Leigh Ann, but I had to get
No,
that.
I got excited and I was like, no, but yeah, so many different things. And that's a great question. And I mean, I basically at this point in my life, I mean, I feel like light pollution is affecting everything. Um, it just goes on and on, so when a tree doesn't drop its leaves as dictated, because it's not reading the seasons correctly, that actually, when those leaves are on, and the ice starts to form, that actually causes the tree to get so heavy that it often breaks trees. So they're just, you know, all of these things that just, you know, domino effects.
He's not experiencing a true dormancy because of the light pollution. Yeah.
Yes.
It's crazy the impacts that we could begin to think about, and maybe we think that the causes are real simple, but I have a feeling they're a lot more complex than we're gathering yet, especially
Yes.
in situations. Yeah, and I also think about the stress, and you talk about the light stress
Mhm.
humans, and my mind went to, these movies, the spy movies where someone is being tortured by 24 hours
Right.
sunlight. And are we not doing this to our trees in an urban setting?
Yeah, and I mean, we are actually doing it to ourselves too. You know, we don't really think of it that way, but you know, it's really funny to me now, you know, when I'm just in a living room and it's like, you know, 10, 11 o'clock at night and all the lights are on, I'm like, this is incredibly strange. And that's the most normal scene in the world, right? You know, somebody in the living room with the lights on. But now I do have this moment where I think, wow, this is incredibly odd that we live this way. And that was it's pretty challenging. You know, I wrote a book where I'm like, okay, a lot of what I think is normal is actually pretty odd in terms of light use.
Yeah. I'd like to experiment in my own home with just, turning off artificial light and maybe just using a few candles. I'm supposed to be relaxing anyway. Just put on some music and some candles and kind of, try to wean myself off of it a little bit, maybe in the later hours of the day.
I will say, I mean, I'm not good about all the things, but I do still use the red lights, and I have candles, I have electric candles, which can be easy to, you know, on and off in the evening to do that. I mean, you know, watching other species react to artificial lights in the environments that I was able to observe them, I think it really did help me understand myself as an animal and kind of understand my physiological responses to light in a different way.
Yeah. Yeah.
And to kind of try to give myself a break from it. Yeah.
Rita says she wants to go back to that, which would be good. And then Carmi shared that she grew up being able to see the Milky Way at night in my home,
Oh,
and it's not visible there anymore. Yeah. I remember
yeah.
when I saw the Milky Way, I didn't even know what it was. You know,
Yeah.
explain it. I was like, oh, it's just not part of my reality. So
Yeah. I mean, a lot of times when people talk about light pollution, they talk about not being able to see the stars. I mean, that's one of the main, you know, kind of arguments for it. And I just got to a point where I started wondering, have we actually already lost that to the point where that's not really enticing? Because, you know, we're getting to a place where in the book, I think one of the things I hope is a takeaway is that we're not only losing that ability, we've kind of just lost that relationship to just the night that is directly around us. And so if we can kind of reestablish that relationship to the darkness that's directly around us and valuing that experience, then ultimately that could lead us to be able to see the stars a little bit better if we can just start, you know, appreciating what's here, changing use of light. That'll ultimately help us see the stars. Yeah.
mhm, really great. Okay. Our next question is, how important are firsthand experiences with the natural world and inspiring change?
Well, I think that they're fundamental. I think they're crucial, and I really believe that people protect what they love. And I don't think that, again, we don't have a lot of stories that teach us how to love the dark. Most of the stories we have teach us to fear the dark, to banish the dark. So I think having positive firsthand experiences with the natural world at night, for example, are crucial in helping people understand that darkness is something to be cared for. Because, you know, when we think of darkness as a void, darkness as death, what, you know, what is there, what does that do in terms of caring for darkness? But when we think of darkness as this cornucopia of life, which is like if you go to a mothing event and you're there and you start seeing all of this diverse, beautiful life just streaming out of the darkness, and you can start to think about darkness as that habitat, as that cornucopia of life. I mean, I think that that's incredibly powerful in thinking about, oh, darkness is full of wondrous things, so darkness should be protected as habitat, which again, I don't think we think of darkness as habitat, but that is what it is.
Yeah, well, I'm encouraged to see that even some of our state parks in Florida are having after hours events and trying to get people to listen to bats, and where there are opportunities coming up, people are beginning to realize.
Yes.
So that's positive, but
I
yeah,
do feel like there's a growing interest in that. And I think that, asking parks about what they have going on. I mean, I think that expressed interest is, supports those programs and hopefully leads to positive changes.
mhm. And just I think our group having read this book, and I know someone who has read this book and is bringing it to her other book club, so it's growing and changing. Maybe just having people come here and come outside, no lights. We're just going to sit out here and talk in the dark and hear what we can see what we can hear and listen for the owls. And we have a lot of flying squirrels in my neighborhood, so it's
Oh,
hear them and I'll say, "Oh, flying squirrel," and someone's like, "Oh, I always wondered what that was." I'm like, "Well, should have figured that out earlier or something."
that's fantastic. So, bioluminescence is living light. So it's like light produced by the chemical reaction in the firefly's body, for example. Flying squirrels are actually a mammal species known to be biofluorescent. So their fur actually, so if you have a UV light and you shine them, they're like hot pink. So they're known to be biofluorescent. They have that energy that is revealed when you use UV light. Yeah, flying
Aw,
squirrels are awesome.
man, you just keep on teaching me so much. Thank you so
And
much.
that's not in the book. That's just a
I
behind the
know.
scenes.
I know. Let me just call you on Fridays and get an update. Um, Steve said that he's concerned that my children's generation will never have an opportunity to see the dark sky, like light just becoming a given. But we got to get them out there and teach them what we want to save.
Yeah. Um, I know it's a worry, but again, on a positive notes, light pollution is truly one of these environmental issues that really can be solved like immediately. If action is taken, it's taken care of. So there is a hopeful notion to that. And also, again, getting out there, having people of all ages just start to appreciate it. I mean, I really do believe, just in what I've seen from just my own storytelling and my own little part of the world. I've just seen how people are receptive and that there is potential for change in our lifetime and in our kids and grandkids' lifetime. So
That's awesome. Good. And for the group, what changes do you want to make in your life after reading Night Magic? Well, you know that you can give Wendy candles for Christmas. That's one thing. What do you all
highly encouraged.
what do you all think? What changes are you thinking about making? Kirsten, are you thinking about making any changes?
Um, well, I don't have much control over the artificial light in my apartment complex, but the changes I want to make are seeing more of the dark night sky and experiencing more darkness, and really understanding that. I would like to go to a dark sky certified park that you had mentioned in the book. I know there's a couple in Florida, I think.
Great. Good. Steve said he wants to plant his first moon garden, which is cool. Very nice. You'll have to let us know who comes to the moon garden, Steve. What other changes you all? I've already changed. I have porch lights that I'm just not turning on. So, And Pamela says she's turning off garage lights. Let's see. Okay, a lot of people just jumped on. Turning off my garage lights, which are on a light sensor. Yeah, that would be great. And Laura says she's gonna put a red light for my front door and outside light, and to cover or turn off all the little lights on my electronics. Oh, that's neat.
Yes, I actually, I mean, just another behind the scenes. I mean, I now travel with painter's tape, so that if I, sometimes in hotel rooms they'll have so many things are lit up, and I'll put painter's tape over all those little lights. Yeah.
That idea, great idea. Patty said traveling to more areas where she can enjoy the excitement of the darkness. Yes. Susan said, I have a lighted garden in Florida. I plan to reduce their hours of illumination. Okay. Patty, turn off the lights in my backyard. And Darlene says to adjust outdoor lighting to only as needed, and warm lighting, not blue violet lighting. Super cool.
These are all wonderful.
They're really awesome. I'm excited to hear how how things might change in their perception, and maybe the wildlife that comes in and that they see.
Yes.
All right, what are some little things that people can do to cultivate curiosity with nature at night? What do you think?
Well, back to the programming that people, like the municipal parks or state parks, national parks, places that have after hours owl prowls, or different places have different approaches to it. But I do think that exploring in the dark can be intimidating, and I think that finding programs like that are a great first step in doing that. A lot of times I would look, it's like in the book, and it's like, okay, I'm going, to Ohio, to Mothapalooza, which I'm super glad I attended. But, I went to Ohio to find moths when, there are moths in my own backyard. But in terms of learning how to meaningfully relate to darkness and to, kind of get acclimated, I think that finding programs like that can be a really helpful first step. And also, really, I do think that it doesn't take too much, and you don't have to go too far. I think kind of it's really countercultural to say, oh, I'm gonna go sit in my backyard with all the lights off, and I'm just gonna go sit in a chair in my backyard in the dark. If somebody comes across you, it's like, are you okay? Like, what's happening?
Right.
Yeah, it's such a strange thing to do. I think, like, it's intimidating. But a great idea, what you're saying, is just to make it a little event, invite a little group of friends over, or, have a neighborhood like dark appreciation party. And, I just read this book, and it was talking about owls and bats and all these things. It's like, what if, we all just in our neighborhood, we all just turned off as many lights as possible, and we just got together and like had food and drinks, and just sat in the dark together to just see what we can see and hear, and what could be revealed, and kind of make it, like a little party, like a little celebration of the dark. And I think that when you approach it in that way, it's not as intimidating. And so it can also come from just that communal appreciation.
Yeah. And I think, it is intimidating to do it by yourself. So bring a friend, bring two friends, and then you'll, have that security there. And, in reading the book, I was often thinking about the marches that we used to have on campus at University of Florida, the Take Back the Night. That was a women's movement,
Yeah.
feminist movement, which is awesome. But the girls would band together, arm, elbow in elbow, and just walk into the darkness and just feel powerful as a group.
Yeah.
We can do this. We don't have to be afraid. We don't have to hide. We can go experience in the night.
I do think there are a lot of aspects of starting to appreciate the night and explore the night, and in ways that that you can find that are appropriate and comfortable, that are really ultimately incredibly empowering. I think that once you kind of start thinking of darkness, really like truly as a friend rather than a foe, I mean, it really can be empowering. And I found it really interesting, just that the concept that in nature, we just think so often of light as safety, but I mean, in nature, nights of high illumination almost always aid predators. So in nature, small prey are actually, they benefit from dark nights because that darkness is avenues of escape, whereas the light helps predators, you know, hunt their prey. And so kind of thinking, I've, you know, to think about hiding out in the dark. It's like darkness belongs to, I'm kind of hiding out in the dark. When you really start to become more comfortable with darkness, it's pretty empowering.
Yeah, great. We have a couple of comments. Darlene, she said she was going to adjust her lighting, but she also said she's presenting in Clay County, which is a neighboring county to mine, on the night garden experience. So she's going to teach this, and she's excited that the book is going to, you know, be a good resource for that.
Well, that's fantastic.
And oh, this is a really good point, Laura. I'm so glad you brought this up. In the Keys, we have areas where night lighting is prohibited. All over Florida, we do because of the turtle nesting.
Yes,
And
yes.
so that is something people are used to doing that.
Yes. That's on the North Carolina coast as well, all the way up the eastern seaboard. People have really embraced red lights and red bulbs and different forms of lighting to pay attention to the turtles. So it's kind of an instance, yeah, where we're appreciating, you know, paying attention to and appreciating those turtles is reducing light in ways that helping people see the stars on the beach too.
Bumper stickers, lights out for turtles. We really, you know, it's a
Yeah.
real campaign for that. So I think lights
It's
for everything. That's what we need.
it's not just the turtles. That's yeah.
And then Laura also said she's down in the Keys. She said, start with campfires. Penny Camp Park, which is a beautiful park that's mostly underwater, has a nighttime campfire chat with the rangers. Well, that's really great.
Yes, that's fantastic. And I think there are quite a few places that have campfire talks, and those are great places to attend. I think also that, you know, the campfire, there's a sense of security of being around a campfire. A lot of people have that nostalgia with campfires if you ever went camping as a kid. So that's fantastic.
Yeah, really awesome. Great suggestion. And then let's see. When traveling outside your local area, is there any night magic that has fascinated you?
Well, you know, looking back, so when I started writing the book, I specifically chose to focus on Southern Appalachia, my home region, because I really wanted it to be a model, kind of like this is the region that I thought I knew best. And as it turns out, I only knew half of it. And so my hope is that that applies to everyone, you know, no matter where you are, you're surrounded by this, you know, parallel universe. In my life, you know, looking back, I can really trace it. I've actually had this interest all my life. You know, I talk about in the book, I mentioned that as a kid, I went caving, which I was really introduced to darkness in a way that, you know, not a lot of kids get that experience, I think. And it was really powerful for me. But, you know, also throughout my life, I mean, you know, I've sought out the Aurora Borealis. I have sought out, the biobays of Puerto Rico, where, you know, the dinoflagellates, these microscopic organisms that neon blue, you'll get out of the water and they're just glowing neon blue all over your skin like Avatar. So I've had all of these experiences. This is prior to starting work on the book. So it's, you know, I'm always, yeah, I'm always fascinated by bioluminescence and just that light and dark concept, which I didn't really recognize until I wrote the book, you know, and then I can kind of trace back where those interests came from and the thought processes that led me there.
Yeah, beautiful. That's awesome. Great. And a question for the group. What is the most magical moment you have experienced in nature at night? And for me, it was the bioluminescence in the ocean.
Yeah.
You know, that really blew me away. And that you could pick it up with your hands and kind of have it just rain down on you
Yeah.
and
And you
not
can
be
see
afraid of the
fish. You
water.
can see fish. They're like little comets in the dark water. It's
And then
fantastic.
you paddle with your kayak, you know, your kayak paddle just has the bioluminescence on it.
Yeah.
Am I saying that right? It is bioluminescence.
Yes.
And the
Yes.
one when the animals give it off, it's what?
Biofluorescence.
Biofluorescence. Okay.
Hmm.
All right, so Rita wants you to make sure that you know that Spruce Pine is having a Hellbender Festival at the end of the month on 8:30 on the 30th of August, and it's around the Hellbenders. And we know, and Hellbenders are salamanders. Great.
I actually hadn't heard about that, but I just heard it too.
Ooh,
I love hellbenders. Yes.
really terrible other name for them that I'm not going to say right now, but I just learned it. It's the one that's a otter. Have you heard that?
Uh-huh.
So what are some other nighttime
It's charismatic of a name.
things for
Yeah.
such an amazing creature?
Yeah, but hellbenders are fantastic.
Yeah, they are great. Not everybody gets to see them. So, what are some other things that magical moments you've experienced in nature at night? Anyone? So people have mentioned the seeing the Milky Way and fireflies, and for me, the bioluminescence. Has anyone else seen the bioluminescence in the water?
Yes, we have those little swirly worms that come out on the full moon and you can watch them come up to the surface and wiggle around.
Ooh.
But my favorite story, my favorite magical moment, I lived in Pittsburgh for years and it's always cloudy at night, so you never see the stars. And when we moved to Virginia, I was taking out the trash one night and I had this really weird feeling. I thought, something is looking at me. And I looked up and I realized there were stars all over the night sky. I said, holy cow, they've been there all this time and I just haven't been able to see them.
I love moments like that.
Yeah, and that was a lot of your moments, Leigh Ann, that it was here all along. I just
Yes.
didn't have the right eyes open. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we live half our lives in darkness, you know, it's or we, you know, before pre-light pollution, but yeah.
Yeah.
And also just the, you know, when we seek it, we'll find it.
Eve said hearing wild wolves howling at night.
Ooh.
Wow.
Yeah, I've heard some like we have coyotes, and 2 years ago I had an experience I'd never heard, like such a pack. It was extraordinary. Yeah.
And yeah, Laura said
Yes, coyotes too. Yes.
for sure. Well, there's a lot to experience out there and have those magical moments. Just so many awesome things. All right.
Yeah, I think you know, we think so many things are, we just think everything's been discovered, and come to find out, you know, no, there's still some mysteries out there.
We're still scratching the surface.
Yeah.
We've kind of talked around this. What limits, how does fear play into all of this? How does fear place us on the face of darkness? Where do you think this fear comes from?
Yeah, I mean, I've come to think of it kind of a fear of the unknown, you know, and in that first chapter, embracing darkness also kind of helped me start to embrace my own fear of the unknown. You know, we really you know, just that, I think there's a lot of there's, you know, physiological reasons that we fear darkness, that we're attracted to, you know, firelight, all of those things. But I think that culturally, that's we've just kind of, it's been commandeered, and you know, artificial light, it's just that fire kind of building and building the light, more light, we can't get enough light. So light serves a purpose, and it has served a purpose for us with survival at night, you know, for millennia. But you know, we're just kind of at a point where we can get more light and more light, and I think that it's we're at a place where I have to make a conscious effort to not just let that overtake us. So to think about what is it that we're fearing, and you know, it's not so much darkness itself, it's the unknowns that darkness holds. And so then if we, you know, to start to understand what the darkness holds is pretty huge. You know, like I still get scared if I'm walking and I hear a deer huff at me in the dark, but I now know that it's a deer huffing at me. You know, I feel like, you know, when you start to recognize the voices of your neighbors in the dark, that's pretty huge. So I think knowing darkness can help alleviate our fear of darkness.
Yeah, beautiful. Really great. Good. And I think this is our last one. for the audience, how has fear of darkness affected your perception of night? Well, I'll go first. For me, it's been, I probably at about 7 years old, walking home from a neighbor's house and his brother hiding in the dark and scaring the bejesus out of me, and so then I became just real frightful, but it was the unknown because Larry hid and I didn't know he was there. If I had known he was there, I wouldn't have been as afraid. But that is kind of, that kind of sets me on edge. And but how has fear affected some of you all, and how have you maybe gotten over that fear of darkness if you've had it? For me, it's having somebody else with me. If I'm in with the group, I'm 100% great. Does anybody want to chime in on that? And if not, that's okay. Rita says not so much fear as safety. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, and it's a factor. I mean, but there's a lot of research. It's also kind of our perception of light and safety, because the research doesn't necessarily indicate that it always is safer, which it's really interesting. And I mean, it's so fraud, I don't really get into it, but it is something to consider and think about.
Yeah. And Laura's saying that her brother hit in the back of her leg and yelled. That doesn't
Yeah, basically people's brothers, like it sounds like older brothers, and they've played a big role in this fear of the night, jumping out of places.
I hope the next generation isn't terrorizing their younger sisters. I hope. Well, the picture here, Leigh Ann, is of the bat house at the University of Florida campus where
That's
we have
amazing. Yeah.
an amazing colony. I always have to read the sign, but the colony is over 200,000 individuals, and they've built
Wow.
house, and it's really, you can hear them chirping as they come alive and then pour out to go over the lake and start
Yeah.
eating. So for us, if you're on campus, we try to, that's one of the things we do, for visitors or guests, is that we bring them to the bat houses and then they can experience the night that way.
Yeah. I mean, I do admit this in the book, but in terms of fear, bats probably the animal in the book that I feared. I mean, I was a little scared. I was scared of bats. And a little bit of fear is healthy. But just kind of examining that fear and thinking, learning more about where that fear might come from for me personally, kind of like culturally. It's just, I now feel like I've gained such a deep appreciation for bats, and I'm still, still a little nervous, but so much more appreciative of the role that they play.
Yeah, I like what
Yeah.
you don't put your hair in a tight bun, but I still wear a hat when I take
Boy,
get a hat.
if I was going to go on like a bat survey,
Yeah.
if I was gonna visit your bat house, I think that might be a situation.
Yeah.
That's a lot more intense than my neighborhood bat situation.
Right.
Yeah.
We're right around 2 o'clock. I think we have hit all of our questions. But just to wrap it up, your main takeaway message that you would like readers to know after reading this book.
Well, I feel like all of the comments that people have made, I feel I'm so grateful for the close readings that everybody gave the book. And I really feel like, the takeaways are actually already being put into action. I mean, everybody's already doing these amazing things that I would dream readers would do. So I'm just really grateful for that, and appreciative. So it's already happening. And I will say that, in terms of if you did appreciate the book and kind of help spread the word, you can leave reviews for the book on Amazon or Goodreads, no matter where you got your copy of the book. And those reviews are super helpful to kind of just, help with the algorithm, and it just kind of helps get the word out to share, what you felt like were the important takeaways, and kind of just keep that conversation going.
For
And
sure.
just, yeah, and thanks so much for having me be part of the book club.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that in the review, they should say this is a good book club book, because
I'm so glad.
together, we all experienced it together and we're able to share kind of our thoughts and our nostalgia and, what we had found. So
And I'm excited with everything that happened. I feel like this is a conversation you guys are going to be continuing, which is wonderful.
absolutely, absolutely. I'd love to hear from you again in the future, and we're excited about all the work you're doing with this. And thank you so much for being with us today. It was just a real treat to have you. So thank you.
Thanks so much. I love being here. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.